Open your textbooks to page 300 and take a look at Self-Test 17-2, Section D. We're going to look at the first part writing example and see how secondary functions fit in with our part writing. Now, the hardest part is actually identifying and putting a Roman numeral to these secondary functions. So that's essentially what we'll go over. I'm not going to go over all the other chords because you should be fine with that by now. You know the drill. Avoid all part writing rules, yada yada. So the first way to identify a secondary function is to look for chromatic pitches in the figured bass. So just scanning through this figured bass here, I see a lot of sevens, and here I see a 7 flat. Now we're in the key of F major, so we shouldn't have any added accidentals. This 7 with a flat, a lowered 7th, tells us that we're going to have a secondary function because we have a chromatic pitch. Now you have to watch out for in minor keys because the figured bass will tell us when to raise that leading tone, and the raised leading tone does not count as a chromatic pitch. So you have to be a little bit more careful in the minor keys. Another way to identify secondary functions is by looking through the bass line for any chromatic pitches. As you can see in this chord that we already identified, we have one right here, proving our point that that definitely is a secondary function. We also have another chromatic pitch in the bass over here. That would tell us we have another secondary function. This is an interesting case because as you can see here, we don't have any accidentals in the figured bass, only the bass line. It can be either or, it doesn't matter, both tell us the same product. So let's solve this one. I'm going to use my scrap piece of paper down below here. The 7 tells us that we have a root position 7th chord based off of F sharp. So I'm going to build that chord right now, F sharp, and then simply stack the pitches above it. Now we don't add any pitches unless the figured bass tells us to. So the figured bass tells us to lower the 7th above the bass. Here's the bass note. A 7th above F sharp would be our E, which I'm going to lower. So to tell what kind of secondary function is, we must look at the quality. Is it a dominant or a leading tone? Well, this definitely is not a major minor 7th chord, so it's definitely a secondary leading tone. Is it half diminished or fully diminished? In order to tell that, you must look at the root and the 7th. What kind of 7th is that? Well, an F sharp to an E sharp would be major. F sharp to E would be a minor 7th. So our F sharp to E flat is a diminished 7th, making this a fully diminished 7th chord. So I'm going to come back up here. We're in root position. We know that already. 7 diminished 7, because it's a 7th chord, of what? Well, basically, this is the leading tone. In what key would this be the leading tone? Simply take the root and count up by a half step. F sharp goes to G. G in the overall key of F major is a 2. Just double check, go to the next chord. This should be our temporary tonic chord, which it is. It's a root position chord based off of the G, making that a 2 chord. There we go. Now, let's build these pitches in. So we need an F sharp, A, C, E flat. Let's deal with the chromatic pitch first. We never want to put that in the melody because the melody should never have chromatic pitches. So I'm going to put that right there, E flat, which leaves me, let me put, how about this, keep it the same. Simplicity is key. Oh, I need to add an upper voice. And I'm going to put this one on the A. Now we have to resolve this correctly. The first thing I'd like you to do is resolve the chromatic pitches. They have to move in a half step, either direction. So our next chord is missing a G, B flat, and a D. So the E flat can resolve down a half step to the D. Now, the next tricky part is Fa must always resolve to Mi, Ti must always resolve to Do, just like any type of 5-7 chord. The key is that those solfege are now pertaining to the temporary tonic. So our temporary tonic is G. That means the leading tone in G is F sharp, which they've already done for us, and the Fa in the key of G would be G, A, B, C. So this C must resolve to Mi, which would be B. Now, in the overall key of this excerpt, which is F major, B flat is not Mi. solfege mi? It's the fourth scale degree. Again, we're talking about solfege in terms of the temporary tonic. These two chords go together. They're a pair. It's kind of like for those 2 seconds, we are not in our original key anymore, but we're in the key of G minor. All right, so the fa in G minor must resolve down to mi. The T in G minor must resolve up to do. Then we're left with this A. We just want to complete the chord, which would mean we're missing the G. Stick that there. Make sure you don't have any part writing errors. If you need be, if you will have it, you should triple the root here and omit the fifth. Let's do one more. We said this was a secondary function as well. It's a root position 7th chord based off of C sharp. No accidentals are added, so I'm just going to stack that. This also is not a secondary dominant because it's not a major minor 7th chord. We have C sharp to a B flat because of the key signature. So what kind of 7th is that? C sharp to B flat. Well, C sharp to B sharp would be major, C sharp to B minor, C sharp to B flat is diminished. So this also is a 7 diminished. 7 because it's root position of what? Count a half step up from the root. C sharp up a half step would be D, and in the key of F, D is the 6th chord. Double check, the next chord is indeed a D chord as well, making this the leading tone to the temporary tonic of D. Let's build this chord. I'm just going to make it easy, simple voice leading, so I'm going to put the B there, E, and G. Look how simple that is from the previous chord. Now we must resolve this correctly. There are no chromatic pitches to worry about, so let's make sure T is going to do, which it is. Now if the chord was inverted, we won't have that happening in our bass note, and we'll have to do that ourselves. Now in the temporary tonic of D, which pitch is fa? What is the 4th scale degree? D, E, F, G. So this G must resolve by a half step down to fa. And then these two are up for grabs. So we have a D, F, make life simple. Well, I can't put this and this on a D and an A because that would have parallel octaves. So I'm going to have to put, let's see, very not smooth voice leading. See how we have parallel octaves right there? So actually in this case, what I would probably do, because if I were to swap these, I'd have spacing errors, I would switch these two pitches. And then I would have this G moving down, D, F, A, and this going up. And that would solve that problem right there. Except then I still have these parallel octaves. So we'd figure it out. You would need to swap something. Maybe now we have to swap the two of these. You know how it works. And if necessary, if you couldn't find a way out of this, what you could do in that case is then triple the root here. So you could triple that root and make sure the fa goes to mi. And that works out well. Okay, the only other thing you have to remember is that if the chord is inverted, that you need to deal with that appropriately by putting either 6-5 would be a first inversion, 4-3 would be second, and 4-2 would be third. Now those numbers replace that 7. Some of you have been doing like 7 diminished 7, 4, 3, but the 7 merely tells us that it's root position. So if it's not in root position, we get rid of the 7, replacing it with like a 6-5.